Hey everybody. So one of the things I'm trying to do to not say so hopeless and depressed is that when I have time to get out of the house, even if I can't spend money on the things I want, like books and pop vinyls and stuff, I at least go and see what new ones are out there and just add them to my Amazon wish list for when I don't need to save my money for, apartment applications and gas to drive to job interviews and that sort of thing. So I went to Cary again, and I went to a Barnes and Noble and stuff, and I felt Barnes and Noble, if you can see it, it's over there. I felt it was a good place to record my thoughts on 50 Shades Darker. I don't really have a lot of time anymore to write full-length movie reviews, but I figured while I was here and I had time, I might as well extemporaneously, sort of, give my thoughts here. A little bit of background: I read the first 50 Shades book, and then saw the first movie, so I did not read the second book, though, so I don't have anything to compare to. At least with the first movie, I could give it credit for the horrible things from the book it didn't contain, like pulling a tampon out of a woman before you have sex with her, or double crap, and all of Anastasia's horrible first-person narration, and all of that, like her being like a 12-year-old in her head and written so infantile. So I can't compare 50 Shades Darker, the book, to the movie, but I can at least give my basic thoughts. My thoughts on the movie: still not good, but not horrible, which is similar to what I thought of the first movie. Not good, but not horrible. A few bullet points here. Christian Grey comes off as somewhat less creepy. I mean, there is the beginning where he goes to an art showing and he buys all of the photos of Anastasia that were taken and is like, hey, I want you back. That's a little creepy. Or continuing to send flowers to her. Or having a dossier made up of her, even though technically that was before the breakup. Those are still very creepy things. But it does introduce a different character, Anastasia's boss, who like pins her up against a wall and is really like, see me, and like, oh, no one can make you come like I can, and it's very, very disturbing. So it's able to make Christian less disturbing and less creepy by introducing an even creepier character to, by comparison, make Christian look better. And the fact that Christian is less creepy overall in the second movie rather than the first movie helps that. I mean, I don't know if the second book continued his fascination or obsession with getting Anastasia to eat all the time or anything like that, so I don't know how much Christian from the movie is watered down from Christian from the book, but he is a bit less creepy. And I think that's part of... I mean, here's the thing. I'm guessing what women like about 50 Shades is the fantasy relationships aspect, that you can take a bad boy, or in this case, a really creepy psychotic boy, and he wants to give up all of his bad qualities to be with you, little old you, even though there's nothing particularly special about you. I feel that's probably a general female fantasy, not that I have any knowledge of what females fantasize about, but I compare it to this. There is a large trope in a lot of different movies of a lot of different genres of semi-attractive to semi-unattractive middle-aged men who seem to get much younger women, like half their age women, attracted to them. This is obviously just kind of a male fantasy. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Certainly our society views younger women with older men differently than it views younger men with older women. But I think, like, I was binge watching House of Cards a couple of months ago before my life went to shit, and there's a character named Doug, and he's balding, he's a former alcoholic, he's not particularly bad or good looking, but he's middle-aged, but women half his age keep falling for him in the show, and that's obviously, like, balding, middle-aged writer wish fulfillment. And we sort of accept that, even though when we look at 50 Shades, some critics are willing to mock it for the wish fulfillment that this ab-toned millionaire, billionaire, whatever, will go after this mousy little girl he met once. But, if we're not gonna judge the other male wish fulfillment, then why judge the female wish fulfillment? So yeah, it doesn't quite make sense, it's a little far-fetched, but it works for what it is. Because I don't think the women are being turned on by the sex in the movie, because it really comes short. Pun not intended, but I guess you can take it that way because I wasn't phrasing it that way. Um, Here's the thing: there are, I think, quantitatively, there are more sex scenes in the second movie than the first movie. I think the problem is that they are much shorter. Like, I don't think any of them extends beyond 2.5 minutes, and they're very bland. I mean, the first 50 Shades movie got a lot of criticism because it's supposed to be about kinky bondage and BDSM and the kind of stuff you'd see on someone's FetLife profile, and instead it was just sort of the light spanking, a brief teasing of toys. It wasn't anything all that. It was basically not BDSM. It was just sort of extremely like vanilla plus. It's maybe cream soda instead of vanilla, or root beer instead of vanilla sex. And it's even blander this time. Aside from Benoit balls, which is the Benoit balls scene, by the way, is very reminiscent of. I want to say there's a bad 50 Shades direct-to-video ripoff called Bound, where a woman has like a vibrating panty or a vibrating toy inside her, and that's sort of a trope in some movies, mostly comedies. I'm thinking of I think it's called The Ugly Truth with Gerard Butler and Katherine Heigl, where like a woman will have some sort of toy, and then she goes to like a proper function. She has to hold back her orgasms. It's done in erotica. It's done in mainstream comedies. It's nothing new or special, but there's a scene like that with Benoit balls in the second movie. And then there's a scene with like dripping, like, I guess, hot wax or some sort of like colorful, possibly scented oil on Dakota Johnson's or Anastasia's breasts. But aside from that, there's nothing particularly kinky or interesting. Like, one of the more laughable scenes is Anastasia goes into the red room and she picks out what ends up being like a leg separator, and she's like, "What's this? I want to try this." And Christian's like, "No, Anastasia, you have to walk before you can learn to run." And she's like, "I want to learn to run." I'm like, is a leg separator really running? I think maybe like cementing yourself into a plastic garbage bag with a tube to breathe in, or I don't know, or like fire play or blood play would be running, not really a leg separator. That's I don't know. I mean, I'm not the kinkiest person myself, but it seems like that's not really running. That is maybe speed walking, maybe the speed that I walk. I don't maybe not even that, but that's kind of laughable. But I think the weird thing also about these sex scenes is that there is a lot more female nudity than male nudity in the film. I think there's like 2 brief shots of Christian, or the actor who plays Christian's ass, and there's some more shirtless scenes of him. And there's a sort of a funny scene where he's like kind of lifting himself on a pommel horse, and it just seems like watered down Magic Mike. Like, if you just want to see shirtless men doing stuff, I would think that women would enjoy the Magic Mike movies, particularly the second one, more than that. But aside from that, you see Dakota Johnson either topless or her butt, or her in scantily clad lingerie, a lot more in the movies, to the extent that I found it weird that maybe the filmmakers forgot who their audience was, or were they tailoring it to the men who'd be dragged along, figuring like, oh, well, the women are turned on by just the idea that a man would change for them and that he's a billionaire. But someone's honking horn behind me. But and then they threw in the nudity for the men coming along with them. Or, I mean, I discussed this when I wrote a print review of the first one, that Dakota Johnson, well, I mean, she's an attractive woman, but I think her body is not one that would put a lot of women off or uncomfortable, as opposed to, say, Charisma Carpenter in that Bound direct-to-video movie with the big like breast implants and stuff. I don't know. But I chalked up maybe like the extra female nudity was due to the general male gaze, because this movie has a male director and a male screenwriter, albeit the male screenwriter is the husband of E.L. James, who wrote the horrible books. So I thought it maybe tricked up to that, but the first movie also similarly had more female nudity than male nudity, and that had a female director and a female screenwriter. So I don't quite understand that. I would actually like to, if I had the ability to interview the writers and directors of either of these movies, I would actually ask that. I mean, I'm not expecting flaccid penis like, Michael Fassbender in Shame or Kevin Bacon in Wild Things or something. Women aren't that turned on by flaccid penises, and you can't show an erect penis unless it's an NC-17 film. But I would still think there'd be at least quantitatively and qualitatively more male nudity in the film than female nudity, but I guess not. Um, Plot wise, the movie doesn't really have a narrative drive. Like, I mean, these books were fan fiction, so I assume they're written piecemeal, like chapter by chapter, like most people write fan fiction. I'm not a big fan of fan fiction itself, but I know people who have written it, and I know people who enjoy it, and that seems to be the process. But at least the first movie had this sort of will she or won't she, Anastasia, sign this contract, this non-legally binding contract, but still would she sign it? So it's the will she or won't she, and that's sort of the narrative drive. The second movie doesn't really have a narrative drive. There's no like conflict or that needs to be overcome. It's just sort of this is a scene, this is a scene, this is a scene. And then when the movie it ends on what I think the filmmakers think is a cliffhanger, but it's really just abrupt. It's just sort of there's a scene, and then the credits start rolling, and you're like, I guess we come back next year for the next movie. There's nothing to carry it through, and that's really weird. I think it's really fucking weird. Um, and I mean, individual scenes kind of work okay. Again, there's a lot of like cheesy, like Lifetime movie dialogue. There's the lead actors have maybe a bit more chemistry than the first movie, but you still can kind of tell that they don't particularly like each other. Um, yeah, Christian has been really watered down as a character. He's definitely not as creepy. I think they definitely listened to studio notes on that, or at least audience notes. Hence, that's why the second movie had a much higher cinema score, where they pull audiences than the first one. Anastasia doesn't seem as naive. She does try to take more agency for herself in the movie, but I think the problem with that is she's the kind of person who doesn't. She's sort of like still trying to force herself to be what Christian wants her to be, or what she thinks Christian wants her to be. And I think she should have learned by the end of the first movie that that's not, you shouldn't have to change yourself. But, I mean, she's also expecting him to completely change himself as well, so I guess it would be hypocritical if she didn't. But it's sort of weird that she's like, oh, take me to the Red Room in the Passion of Throws, even though it's like, if you're fucking in the shower, you're really going to stop to move a location and then continue fucking? It doesn't quite make sense. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, like, moving to different locations when they're horny. It's weird. And there's like 30-second cunnilingus, and then it stops. It moves very fast. That might have been like an MPAA issue to keep an R rating. That everything has to be like pretty fast, but it really, you don't get a lot of erotic momentum. Like, some of these scenes probably could be sexy if they went on longer or there was more build up. But instead it's just sort of this happens and this happens, and we cut back to more story. And it'd be sort of like if John Wick Chapter 2, John Wick fired 2 bullets and then it cut to more plot. Like, there's no like dance choreography action sequences in but the sex version of them in 50 Shades, it's more like coitus interruptus for every sex sequence, considering how many there are. It's weird. Um Kim Basinger plays the woman who, I guess, like, seduced / statutorily raped Christian. Now, Kim Basinger, of course, was in 9.5 Weeks, probably the movie that, aside from Twilight, 9.5 Weeks was probably the biggest influence on the 50 Shades. You know, it's about a rich guy whose last name is also Gray, who's also sort of a dominant sadist who abuses this woman. They have a torrid affair, and then she finally takes her own agency and leaves. But that movie does it a lot better, and it ends up portraying that Gray, John Gray, I think his name is in the movie, Mickey Rourke, as sort of dark and evil and creepy. It doesn't try to romanticize him after, like, maybe the middle of the second act. So I was hoping that, maybe because she was in 9.5 Weeks, basically a much better version of what 50 Shades wants to be. I was going to say like 9.5 Shades. I thought maybe that would be better, but nothing particularly happens with her character. She's just kind of there to give Anastasia like, oh, you can never be what he wants to be, and then she gets some like champagne or wine thrown in her face, and in this really like soapy, badly written, melodramatic scene that you'd see in like an 80s primetime soap like Dynasty or Dallas or something. Well, Dallas was earlier, but definitely Dynasty, like a Joan Collins type thing. So that was a bit weird. There's also like an Eyes Wide Shut masked ball for charity, which is really weird. I think E.L. James did watch Eyes Wide Shut and was sort of like, oh, I can throw some creepy like Venetian masks in my book. So So that's there. Apparently, just rich people who like kinky sex always wear Venetian masks. That's what I'm learning from Hollywood right now. Um, the biggest distraction in the movie is that Christian Grey has a Chronicles of Riddick poster in his childhood bedroom, or at least his teenage bedroom. It was like, really? The Chronicles of Riddick of all movies? Now, I get 50 Shades Darker was released by Universal Studios. Chronicles of Riddick is also a Universal movie. But they couldn't find a better movie in the Universal Vault that maybe Christian Grey would like more. It seems... I don't see Christian Grey watching the Chronicles of Riddick and liking it so much that he has a poster, especially because I think he has a couple other like classic movie posters in his bedroom, but otherwise it's just really glaring. And there's a scene where him and Anastasia are on the bed, and it's sort of like an upward shot from maybe lower on like the bed level, so it's really prominent in the frame, and it's really fucking distracting. And it was like, if Christian Grey were gonna like maybe a superhero-ish kind of character, you'd think he'd like Judge Dredd, someone who's domineering and what he says goes and is sort of a crypto-fascist. You think a dom/sadist would identify more with like a Judge Dredd than a what's Riddick's first name? I forget. Is it John Riddick? I forget. But yeah, it didn't fit, and it's the production designer or the art director or whoever put that up there should be ashamed of themselves, because it's really fucking distracting. Like when I saw the movie the opening Friday night, and then the next day I looked at reviews, and I wasn't the only one who brought up this Reddit poster, so it was like, all right, I'm not the only person it's bothering. All right. But yeah, I don't really see. It's not a horrible movie, but it's not good. You don't feel the romance between these two people. The sex scenes are pretty bland and uninspired. Aside from, as a guy watching it, I'm like, okay, Dakota Johnson's pretty. I enjoy seeing pretty women topless and bottomless. So it's semi-arousing on that sense, but there's nothing about the action to make it like arousing or hot and heavy or anything. So I don't know, maybe women will like those scenes more. If you're a woman and you like those scenes, comment below, tell me what you liked about it. If you like the movie in general, comment, because I'm interested in hearing, because I find it hard to believe that there's people who watch these movies and enjoy them unironically, but apparently there are, and there's quite a bit of them. Not that my channel's viewership has a lot of middle-aged female subscribers. I look at the demographics, it's mostly men slightly younger than me. But I don't know. I don't really have much else to say about it that's funny. I mean, there's... Alright, well, there's a helicopter crash scene in the third act. It comes out of nowhere. It doesn't fit the tone of everything else, and it's really ridiculous that he crashes and he's not found and no one notifies his family until he shows up at his own apartment slightly dirtied. It's... It's like, really, is that the narrative device you needed for these two to get engaged? Really that? It's like Anastasia has like a friend in her office that there's no real connection. When her boss is fired for sexually harassing her, she's moved up to the boss's job because she makes like one bland, but like suggestion at a meeting. It's really an unrealistic depiction of a promotion in a publishing company. I don't know. I'm probably forgetting some stuff because I saw this movie like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, something like that. Oh, it was a week ago. Yeah. So I'm probably forgetting some stuff, but there's really not... I thought I'd have more fodder to make fun of it. Like, the first movie had more humor fodder. This one was just sort of a lot blander. That's probably the word I would use to describe the movie, is just bland. And if you're watching a kinky sex erotica sort of thriller, I mean, there's not really that many thriller elements, you don't want to feel it's bland. Like, I wouldn't call it boring. I wasn't bored during it, but it's bland. And I kind of felt like either the movie should step up its game and be a good movie, or it should step down its game and be so bad it's good, which is kind of where I described the first movie. But this one's just sort of like, eh. So, I don't know. I'm sorry that this video in my review isn't as funny as I was hoping it would be, but there's actually not that much fodder in it. It's a bland movie with some bland sex scenes and some ridiculous dialogue, and it's all sort of naive wish fulfillment. But what are we expecting from Twilight fan fiction that rips off 9.5 Weeks, where the lead actors don't like each other? And I don't know. It is what it is.